Coming up now, we've got another full-time officer debate chaired by Head of News and Sport, Kat Suave, with your candidates for YUSU President.
Candidate Interview Night 2016.
Union President Candidates Debate.
So, hello, I am joined by Millie, Oliver and JJ here in the studio. Now, I'm going to get straight to the questions. You all talk about the buzzword of transparency. What does that mean? Yeah, anyone, just go for it.
Basically, the way I see it is, YUSU is transparent at the moment. It's just not accessible. The information is there. It's hard to find, though. So say if I wanted to find something like, the current record, financial records, I'd have to go through several hoops just to get that. Whereas I think it would be better if that kind of accessibility was more open. It's not a matter of transparency. It's a matter of accessibility.
I think that whilst there is some transparency in YUSU already, that they've made some great strides forward in the last few years, there are some still hurdles to be overcome. I mean, they, as a charity, they're exempt from Freedom of Information Act requests or responding to Freedom of Information Act requests in the way that other organisations are not. Now, seeing as that they're entirely funded through student money, I think that perhaps shouldn't be the way it is. And so, one of my policies is actually to increase transparency by responding to all Freedom of Information Act requests quickly and as if it were not YUSU were not an exempt organisation.
Then would you do this? Sorry to interrupt. Would you do this at the sort of expense of YUSU itself?
Well, I mean, I think it's definitely something that we need to consider. I don't think it would. We could call it an expense when the body that's representing 18,000 students across York and students elsewhere in the country as well is being thoroughly and critically reviewed.
Millie, what about transparency for you?
I was just going to say, I feel that transparency is quite a more complex word than it's often been given credit for. So a lot of YUSU is never going to be entirely transparent, and that's because some of the matters that are discussed are confidential to the students, which I think is really, really important. First and foremost, we've got to lay that down. Secondly, I feel as though there is a lot of transparent work going on, but as has been said already, it's not very well communicated. I think some of that will be plugged and kind of filled in by the new website that's currently being created, and I feel like there will be more communication going on in the future. It's something that I will try and ensure if I get the role of president. However, I feel that what we should be pushing for is an element of, complete openness, if that makes sense. It was about looking at information and going, this is what the students want to see and deserve to see, more than just kind of chucking everything at them that actually they're not interested in, because then the interesting things will get lost. So I feel like it's about openness, and when information is requested, as Oliver says, we should provide it to the best of our ability and to the fullness that students deserve.
But Millie, don't we run the risk, if we sort of do openness, of sort of curating an experience and not really giving students and student media organisations the ability to really find stuff that maybe even YUSU itself isn't aware that's a problem?
I think that's a valid question, definitely. So I think in terms of openness, you deliberately put forward the things that you think students will have an interest in. That's not saying that we hide other things. That's just saying that it's all there, but it's important that we highlight the things that are both really successful and questionable about YUSU, because those are the things that the students will want to see and perhaps won't get picked out because they'll be lost in the giant ocean of transparency.
Well, you all talk about openness and wanting to deliver on promises of freedom of speech. Now, when this actually does come to happen, the university and YUSU block these requests, as has happened in the past week or so. So what are you realistically going to do about free speech and opportunities to platform?
Well, I think that the role of YUSU President has a huge, not just an ability to sort of represent students, but is a leading light for YUSU and other sabbatical officers. So it's definitely something that I think I'd like to combat, make sure that free speech is championed by YUSU. Of course, there are things, as Millie says, that are sensitive and of course. And I can't predict what those things are going to come up, and I don't think any of us can. It needs to be done on a case-by-case basis, but there needs to be a general leading light of freedom of information around the Students' Union.
I agree. I think we need to definitely push for freedom of speech, and I feel that the only thing that should kind of get in the way of that is probably kind of if it has a direct impact on the kind of well-being or welfare of a student or anyone really. And I kind of came up with a phrase that I think sums it up quite well, which is name and blame rather than name and shame. We shouldn't be doing anything to deliberately embarrass anyone. It should be critiques of obviously referring to last week, it should be critiques of kind of professionalism and performance and things like that. It shouldn't be about the individual. But going on from that, I feel as though freedom of speech is really crucial, and it should be focused on whether it damages the students.
Yeah, so moving on slightly to something more welfare-based, mental health is something that comes up again and again as something to improve on. My question to you is, why haven't previous well-being and community officers been doing their job right, if this is something that you all are talking about?
Can I jump in on this? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, so mental health is definitely something that is a little bit crazy at this university, to put it bluntly. So essentially, mental health at the university, a lot of people apply to the open door team, and the thing that comes under criticism again and again is the fact that there is too long a waiting time for open door. The problem with that is that essentially mental health services are overstretched. And the thing is that usually what happens is you're meant to have 3 open door appointments, and then that's meant to get passed on to a GP. It's meant to be resolved, or it's going to require some kind of aftercare and maintenance and things like that. What's happening at the moment is because of the closure of the Bootham area, they've stretched up to 6 appointments per person, which means the waiting times have got longer. So what we need to do is not approach the university and lobby the university, because they won't change it. And that's what people have been doing wrong. We need to go and lobby the council and form partnerships with York St John and other groups to ensure that we have got mental health provision in York itself, because open door is not going to cover that. And then alongside that, I feel like more preventative measures need to be put in place.
I mean, I totally sympathise. An open door are really stretched to the limit at the moment. And one of the things that we can do to combat that is Nightline provides an absolutely fantastic service. But at the moment, their offices, they had their old offices knocked down, and they're over in Essington Village now. And they're not particularly well provided for in those offices. So what I'd do is I'd campaign, and I've committed to campaign for them to have state-of-the-art dedicated office space in the further Essington East development, probably in one of the colleges 11 or 12. And that might be able to, obviously, it would be better if professionals and the students, they're volunteers, but they do an absolutely amazing job. But that would be able to take some of the strain and the pressure off the open door service and the other services.
With all due respect, as a public face of Nightline, I do agree that they do a fantastic service, but they are not there in place of counsellors, and I know you've said that, but they shouldn't be there to take the strain off of open door service. They are a team of volunteers who work incredibly hard and do a great job, but they are there to listen and not lecture, and therefore they can't provide the advice and the counselling and the CBT and things like that is required to cure mental health.
But I mean, you did touch on preventative measures, and having a sort of an impartial listening service is a kind of preventative measure, and if we have a preventative if we have this service that doesn't have proper premises and proper equipment and real support from the university and from USU, then they can't act in a preventative way, surely.
I agree with Oliver. Nightline needs more funding to get the equipment they need and the equipment they deserve, just to help more students who have queries, and maybe like an expanded part of Nightline, so that more people can call in and just more volunteers. Yeah.
Just to jump in, have anyone actually spoken to Nightline about this?
Oh yeah, I spoke to Nightline, and they really supported my push.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important that we find them new buildings and things like that, but all of it's got to be done to match their specifications, which is why it's been so difficult so far. Sorry, carry on.
No, absolutely. Another issue that arises again and again is the cost of living here in York. Now, you all seem to talk about decreasing the cost of rent, or especially on campus. Now, is that actually something that you can do as student union president, or is this just another case of telling students what they want to hear?
It's not actually in my manifesto, because I would argue it is to an extent a case of telling students what they want to hear. So essentially most of the accommodation on campus, both campuses, is run by external facilitators. So they run the accommodation, they control the prices, and we have a limit on what we can do about that. There are, however, certain safeguards we can put in place. In the past, USU has looked into capping the costs to ensure that they can't rise past a certain amount. I propose that we kind of pursue that. And furthermore, there's stuff that we can get involved with in town in terms of approved landlords and things like that, which I feel are really relevant and coming through more and more as we have issues with damp and things like that for every student.
I think absolutely one of the problems here is not only pricing, but like value for money. I live in a quite a cheap house in York, but my landlord has been relatively inconsistent with how much support that we've received with problems with the house. And so we also need to, whilst we need to look at pricing, we also need to make sure that the people who are looking for cheaper homes are being served just as well as people who are paying more.
The way I see it is, the housing prices in York aren't that expensive. I'm someone from London, and it's far more expensive to live in London than it is in York. So I see it's not so much a problem of pricing, it's a problem of how much money the person has to spend. And with student loans and student grants, most people can cover the cost. Like I was able to cover the cost of my rent just with my student grant alone. So I don't see pricing as that big a problem, as that big of an issue that needs to be addressed, where there are other issues that actually need more focus and more attention.
Well, I think definitely there are of course there's plenty of issues, and we're touching on a lot of them. I mean, one of my policies is value for money for students, because as we said, student grants, but they only go so far, right? Most students have about £12,000 of income a year, and now student presidents get paid from the money that students contribute to the university, £18,000 a year. Plus overtime if they work for longer. Now, I mean, I've lived on less than £12,000 a year for the last 3 years, and so I'm going to pledge to cut my salary by £3,000 by donating £3,000 of it directly to the Student Financial Support Centre. So that would sort of kill two birds with one stone there. So helping out students who feel like that they aren't getting value for money if they don't have enough to make ends meet, and also providing value for money as a student president.
While I feel that that's a very admirable action, I would ask why you'd see fit to do that as a president and not extend it to your entire SAB team, first and foremost.
Well, I mean,
secondly, I'd also ask whether, because the amount of £3,000 as like a greater gesture as it is kind of negligible in terms of student support. Would that money not be better sourced kind of going to something like Nightline, which you yourself have said that they deserve better resources? Or equally, shouldn't the students be able to decide whether that £3,000 go to somewhere tangible where it can actually make a tangible difference?
I mean, just one point. I don't see how that much money would make that big an impact. Like YUSU Commercial Services, separate from the charity, but donates its profits to the charity, turns over £6 million a year. So I don't see how £3,000 would make that massive an impact.
Of course, it's a drop in the ocean in the amount of funding that UC does need to have. But to address your first point, Millie, about extending the SAB team, I mean, I don't want to. If people don't feel like if I was elected and my SAB team felt like that they couldn't live on an average student income, then I wouldn't want to pressure them into doing that. But I think I definitely can. So I can commit to providing. I've done it for 3 years. I can definitely do it for 4 if my salary is being paid by students. I think that it's more about representing students. The policy is about saying that, look, I'm the first among equals. I'm the person representing you, but I'm not being paid above and beyond, above the odds, and not really reflecting the student experience.
Right, okay, yes, moving on. JJ, you mentioned that international students are not well represented in USU and that you want to give them a platform. What about the International Students Association?
There's thousands of international students in the University of York. However, they don't get the recognition they deserve. Such as, I'm sure everyone's seen international students around, but there's nothing tailored just for them. Like, you see societies tailored for, other students, but not specifically targeted towards them. So I feel like we should offer more opportunities for them to express their opinion and a platform for them really to speak out about what they want in the university.
Millie and Oliver, do you agree about that?
Well, I mean, I think that York has a great diversity of people from all backgrounds, but surely the most benefit we get from that is from when we all work together and we all sort of integrate amongst societies. I mean, it's not like people who come to university here don't speak English or have that. There's not really a communication barrier. So whilst I think that international students should be invited to get involved. They should be invited to get involved in the current societies instead of partitioning them off and sort of putting them, having a different university. You don't really want to have two bubbles, really, do you?
I feel as though it's a valid point. Sometimes we feel like there is a split between international students and domestic students, for want of a better word. However, I do feel as though I agree with Oliver and that we should encourage them to join societies and things like that. But also, more importantly, I think colleges are a great place to start. Having worked with the college last year, trying to pull international students in and really encourage them to get involved. And I feel that USU as a student union to do everything they can to encourage that and support that. So yeah.
I also feel that there's a similar problem with postgraduate students. Mm-hmm. They don't get the full university experience they have, be it because they have families of their own, they're mature students, or they just don't have the time to put in. So I feel like we should have more, like, as you both, Millie and Oliver, said, we should have, introduce them to more societies on campus and really help them to get involved. Because I feel like they don't see the opportunities.
Do we really? I mean, if they're postgraduates, they've already had a university experience. They, as you say, they might have families. we're all at university. We're still in our undergraduate degrees, as far as I'm aware. And we're happy with the great experience that we have. But I mean, it's a different experience. We don't have to enforce postgrads to get involved. They can get involved.
No,
if they
I
want
wouldn't
to,
enforce them. I wouldn't say this is what you have to do. Go do it. What I'd say is I'd offer them the opportunity, because I feel like they don't get the opportunity. Speaking to postgrads, they don't get the same opportunities I myself or other undergraduates would get.
Sorry to jump in, but we're 3, correct me if I'm wrong, students from England who are all of us undergrads. I feel like the most valuable way to tackle this would be to go and talk to the GSA and to postgraduate students, to go and talk to international students and find out what they want. We could even work with great student organisations like the Think Tank. They could do research into this. I know definitely they did some research into international students, and I think it would be great to take what they've discovered and actually implement that. So we're using the societies that York has to offer because they're fabulous and they deserve more recognition.
I feel like the postgraduate student integration is a thing that comes around every year with the elections, and I'm just not. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Millie, you're right. A bit of research from the think tank or from the university or from USU would show that I'm not. But the general feeling I get when talking to postgrads is that they're quite happy with their university experience, but it's behind them and that they're doing something else now. They more feel like they're working rather than learning.
With all due respect, I've had a very different discussion with a lot of people.
Yeah,
but yeah,
the same
research
with
is
Millie.
needed. Yeah.
Different responses.
Well, as a postgraduate student myself, I'm not going to offer any opinion on that. But to finish off, I suppose, could you just tell me what do you think Ben Leatham, the current USU Pres, has done wrong and what you would have done instead, on your point?
I struggle to find some major thing that Ben's done. What I would say that Ben hasn't quite done is tackled the crisis of representation that USU's been facing for the last couple of years. Ben has been very good at running USU and has done a great number of things, but he hasn't really shouted about those things, and he hasn't put forward why USU is so great. And I didn't really, I've been here for 3 years. This is my first time I've been running for a USU position, and I definitely felt that over the last 3 years, and in Ben's time as well, I didn't really know exactly what USU were doing until I decided to proactively get involved. So I think there's a lot of people who don't have that drive or have other things to do, and still don't really understand. It's not very open, it's not very efficient, and they're a bit obscure, really.
Having been involved in Ben's campaign team last year, I have seen a lot of the kind of experiences that he's had, and he's had to face a lot head on that's been incredibly difficult, and he's managed it very well. I think my criticism would come from a point of view where I sat down with him and I was like, right, so when do you talk to your part-time officers? Do you get together with them at all? And he was like, yeah, we chat. And I think for me, I'd like to formalise that process and create a summit which brings part-time officers, full-time officers, college chairs and presidents, and society chairs and presidents together to ensure that we're all on the same page and we're all acting cohesively. Even if it's not to the same results, we can at least make sure that nothing is causing offence to anybody else and we don't get any giant issues like the International Men's Day thing that did flag up, even though that wasn't UC's fault initially.
The main criticism I'd have with Ben's current running would be his lack of involvement of first-year students. Speaking to first years, I've heard that a lot of them don't feel like they're involved with UC. They feel very apathetic towards it, and I feel like that was something Ben didn't quite address in his term.
All right, well, Millie, Oliver and JJ, thank you so much for joining us on our first presidential debate.
Candidates